Ask one final question if there's nothing else. It's just an extension of what I was raising before. So if you project that China's eventually going to become a democracy because its economic and social development, cultural change, a lot of things will likely propel it in that direction. But there's going to be this political resistance from a conservative elite. It seems to me that at some point out there, there's going to be a very dangerous period. We were talking, just in fairness, we were talking about this before. And that there is the risk, with Taiwan and the United States, and maybe Japan being prominent recipients of the risk, that communist rule could fall suddenly, or descend into a period of profound crisis, and that the only thing they would have left to rally national legitimacy is nationalism, or some version of what Putin is doing in Ukraine. And so this implies a couple of things, and these are kind of sobering. One is, in terms of the direction I think we're headed in, one is obviously don't gratuitously poke your finger in China's eye over the transitional period. Don't create unnecessary provocations that would play into a kind of groundswell of Chinese nationalism. And two, we just have to project sustained military power into the region, and at least shore up some kind of defensive capability, as you say, probably more shrewdly asymmetrical in nature. So the costs of trying to conquer Taiwan militarily quickly become unreasonable for the PRC, not that it can't be done. And I have been becoming worried for a while that those aren't happening. And I've also been becoming worried, I don't know if you could speak to this, that it would not be, given the modernization of Chinese military capacity, it would not be so easy any longer for the United States to do what we did in 1996, which would be to send 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to either end of the Taiwan Strait. As a show of strength, some Chinese-style Putin might actually sink a good portion of the U.S. fleet. So you have any concluding thoughts on that?
Yeah, this really gets into the ugly portion of my talk and book. The military competition between the United States and China is getting really intense.
Sober.
Yeah, and we're talking about 2 nuclear powers here, and for a whole host of reasons, China doesn't want to talk even the way we used to talk with the Soviets about the most destabilizing systems. Sinking a
nuclear systems,
nuclear, cyber, but even this sort of almost blasé talk about sinking an aircraft carrier, which would kill 5,000 Americans. I mean, there would be more dead U.S. sailors than we've ever had. We haven't lost sailors since World War II, since Let Take Off. One of the biggest problems, again, and this comes down to theories of peace and war, one of the biggest problems I feel like the U.S. has had in terms of why it gets into wars in the first place is because people don't believe us, that we take matters seriously, or that we're serious. I mean, you could point to any number of issues. I mean, Saddam in '90, with the Japanese in Pearl Harbor, and so the answer has got to be, and this let's just quarter out the military security aspects of things. There's got to be that if you're shooting a U.S. carrier battle group, you're not really going to. The U.S. is one of the most unpredictable countries in the world when it comes to strategic affairs. The U.S. kept Korea out of the defense perimeter, the famous Atchison talk in 1949. And then we were fighting in Korea in 1950. So, and I'm just using that as one of many. Barack Obama was out of Iraq, and now we're in Iraq, fighting a war. So, sometimes we don't know what's going to, trigger us ourselves. But I think the sinking of a carrier would trigger us. And the reminder to China just exactly what they're talking about when they talk about these things. Or the fact that Guam and Hawaii are U.S. territory. We are a nuclear power, And I'll say that it's a little bit going on the other side as well. And this is the very tricky game of deterrence. That whoever thinks they have deterrence down pat, it's got to just take that with a grain of salt. I mean, we don't know what deters China, and China doesn't know what deters us. But the U.S. can also be quite blasé now about talking about operational responses that might hit mainland and the rest of it, which it's fine. It's good to have those debates, But we got to remember that they are too a nuclear power. And so, the military competition is getting very ugly, and it's gone beyond sort of. There's still some people who talk about it in terms of lack of understandings and misunderstandings, and need more understanding. I think we understand each other quite well. I think that China, hopes to control the East, Yellow, and South China Seas and the Taiwan Straits, and the United States has always found that its security benefits by projecting power into those straits. So I think we've come to a clash of national interests. Now the question is, how do you manage those so that they don't become conflict? And I would hope that at least one aspect of our China policy should move into that realm rather than to continue to talk about misunderstandings and accidents. And also, speak, in terms of deterrence in Taiwan, I mean, instead of walking around in circles around this issue, if you attack Taiwan, don't do it. I mean, that sounds very simple, but we don't say it. It's sort of like, and again, I go back to other.
You have to have a national leadership where there's no ambiguity at all.
Well, we tried to move. In 2001, we tried to move away from strategic ambiguity. Somehow, we walked away from that. Because all sorts of arguments, which but just don't do it. I mean, we understand that we want to negotiate a political solution in the future, but don't attack Taiwan. That's not acceptable. We don't say it, and we don't demonstrate. So to me, that hurts deterrence. Now to your question of do you provoke a dying bear or not? Well, I think at this point you have to assume that that China will take you seriously if you make clear through both words and demonstrations of what your core national interests are. And to me, the more dangerous thing. So go back to your Putin example. I mean, there are those who will argue that the problem with Ukraine was mostly one of the U.S. and NATO poking.
That's not what I think.
Yeah, exactly. I'm making both cases. But there are those who will argue that that's the problem, right? And they argue it in pages of, Now, my question is, if there was more of a security commitment by the United States, and if you actually, one of the greatest deterrents to foreign powers is actually the idea of actually killing American soldiers. We don't want to do that. I'm with you on that, and I think once you've made the commitments, you have to back them up. And the fact is that we have these commitments, and Taiwan is de facto one of them, and we've had them for a long time. And either we can decide as a nation to back away from them, or but then we really have to have a policy that does that and come home, or we have to back them up with power. And obviously I come down on the latter side, but we can't kind of have this mishmash middle, which is yes, we have these alliances and commitments, but we don't want to push China too much. There, you got the full hardliner out.
I've seen the full hardliner, and you're not it.
So what do you make of the pivot?
I think there were a number of things done since the end of the Cold War I think first President Bush and Secretary Baker had the famous APEC initiative and the famous kind of the Pacific's becoming important, and we're not going to be kept out of it. So I think there's been I look at the broad sweep of at least recent U.S. history, and I see the continuity. So we've done APEC, President Clinton sent the carriers in the Taiwan Strait, upgraded the Japan alliance, upgraded the security alliance with Taiwan. We've been moving forces into the Pacific for the last 20 years, and that's not anything new. President Bush had opening to India. He had the upgrade further of the Australia and Japan relationship. For a whole host of reasons, it was decided to announce this new initiative with great fanfare. And part of that was, I think, the belief, or at least the desire to pull out of other the Middle East and places. I think the problems become when you're announcing sort of a great strategic masterstroke. When first of all, the rest of the world has a say about where you might go in the world. We saw that in the first sort of attack on the pivot was Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The second was probably ISIS's reemergence in Iraq, and then the third was probably the bipartisan decision to cut defense by $1.5 trillion a year. So there just is a lot. It's a lot of. My fear is that we're getting into this strategy resources mismatch. That we're saying a lot of things, we're not doing a lot of
resources.
And I also need diplomatic resources. I think that if the president, with the help of Congress, can get the Trans-Pacific Partnership passed, that would be a big legacy issue, and that would lock us into Asia more. I just, I think for a whole host of other bureaucratic reasons, it's not quite, what either the Obama administration set out for it to be, or what allies expected.
All right. Well, join me in thanking our speaker, Dan,
Thanks a
for
lot.
making the trip out here. And it looks like we actually have some sunshine.
Great.
How much longer is it on for?
I got it.
Yeah, we can talk on the way out.